Hello, April, and welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. I am super excited because I know you talk about change, and I just got a copy of your book, and that's what I talk about. And then I found out that without me even knowing it, after I invited you on the podcast, that you actually have an acting background as well. So this is doubly appropriate.
Yay.
And I always love talking to people, who sort of get what I do a little bit more. So before we get into all that, because other people who are listening perhaps don't know about you, could you give us just the 1 minute April bio, kind of what you do, how you work, kind of what you're, in 1 minute, what you're sort of
What I'm
April, who you
about,
are, what you
right?
do.
Sure. I'm an organizational change management expert, and certified change management professional and project management professional. And I work with organizations who are going through change, which I think is every organization at the moment. And I help their people get ready for that change. And so part of what I do is work directly with leaders and in a consulting sort of arrangement with them. I speak a lot for organizations who are trying to communicate with their teams and let them know what's happening. And then I also spend a lot of time training change management professionals so they can become certified.
Oh, that's fantastic. I didn't realize that you also train change management professionals.
Yes.
So this is great, and you are the author of a book called Ready, Set, Change, which, if you're watching the video, you can see you've got a nice big pop-up banner behind you. But I read the book, and it's great, and you've got a whole 5-step framework in there, which I want to talk about. Before we get into that, though, I'd like to talk a little bit about your background. Sort of, you've been talking about change. You've been in business for a while. You mentioned you're a certified change management professional. I believe
Yes.
you did not mention that you are also a certified speaking professional.
Oh, I didn't mention that. You're right. A CSP as well.
Which is shocking because when speakers are talking to each other, that's like the little chevron you gotta like let people know. I am a CSP. Now, for those of you listening who are unfamiliar with the National Speakers Association, this might be meaningless to you, but to those of us in the association, it's a big deal. So
Yes, it
you've got
is.
you've
It's
got
a
lots of
huge deal.
yeah, and you've got lots of credentials, lots of credibility, which is great. So let's talk a little bit about the credibility, and kind of how did your change management journey begin?
Well, my change management journey was a little bit accidental, as many of our careers tend to be. I had been an adjunct professor. I had been doing a lot of consulting and presenting for different groups. And I met a woman at an ASTD meeting when they used to be called that before
Mm-hmm.
everybody realized what you were saying that you were going to. But I went to this American Society of Training and Development meeting, and she met me and said, I'm building a team to lead change, and I think you'd be a perfect match for the team. I had no idea what she was really talking about, but I said, great, I'll email you. And we were in touch, and
Mm-hmm.
she hired me to lead a huge ERP project, the change portion, with two other consultants. So three of us were going to lead these 5 modules at the University of Michigan. And so it was the first university big ERP implementation where we were bringing in the student administration pieces, which usually the ERPs didn't have any of that. We were a beta school. So
And just
that's
for the
where my career
non-super
started.
corporate types, could you just define what ERP is for people?
Sure. ERP is an enterprise resource planning system. And usually ERPs are used in businesses for finance and for HR so that it's kind of an umbrella system that talks to different systems. So you have everything in one place. There's one source of truth. But that hadn't been done for universities at that time.
Mm-hmm.
As a university student administration, ensuring that our students were billed correctly, for their tuition, and then, everything from matriculation to graduation, keeping track of all their grades. I mean, it was really massive. And so that was an exciting project. And I was a change management lead there. I was paired with two. Arthur Anderson, at the time it was
Oh.
Anderson Consulting.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's Accenture, but it was Anderson Consulting. I was paired with two fabulous consultants, and the three of us worked together for a number of years implementing that system and helping people move through that change. And so that was enlightening, and it was really where I got my feet in organizational change management.
Oh wow. And I think, I do a lot of motivational, quote unquote speaking, and I think I just love the kind of part you just went over real quickly was I didn't really know what it was, but I said yes, and it's amazing how sometimes those little like let me just see what happens just absolutely kind of change a trajectory of your career and life.
Yes, and I did. I said, yes, and let me learn what this is. I was very, very fortunate to have met my boss there at the meeting, and I felt like it launched me on the perfect trajectory for me because, part of what is doesn't make sense to people about organizational change management. It's like, why do you need that? Well, organizational change management is many things, but primarily it is like it's like a it's a three-legged stool, I'll say. Three-legged stool. Communication, right?
Hmm.
Making sure that everybody knows what's happening, what's going on. And also training and development. So being able to teach people how to use something new and be successful with it. And then the third part is like the organizational business process redesign and organizational structure change. So
Hmm.
those three pieces make up organizational change management. And I had been an actor. I was in a um, I had graduated from college with a theater degree, and I
Hmm.
went out with a theater company to do Jack and the Beanstalk all over the Midwest.
Really?
Yes, we were in Kentucky and we were in Ohio and Indiana and
Oh
you
my
name it.
goodness.
If it was a Midwest state, we were there, and we performed uh the entire summer. I think we started in May, got done around, September or so. And I instantly got out of this experience of being on the road as an actor and ran to my university and said to my department chair, I have to go to grad school because I certainly can't make a living like this. And that's where I started to, you know, I he said, wish granted, go talk to the food and health service or food and housing services. They have a job for you. And then I was able to work my way through grad school
Oh wow.
doing
And so when you decided that all right, the life of a traveling actor wasn't for you, what did you go back to grad school for?
communications. I did my master's in
Yeah.
communications, and at that time, I had learned what training and development was. I had been doing some consulting with people who were doing training, and I thought that's the thing. That's what I want to do. So
Hmm.
I did my master's in communication, and I specialized in training and development.
Well, again, going back to the motivational bit there, what I also love is that you did the thing which I see so many people not do, which is you gave it a shot. Like you didn't romanticize this thing about being an actor and sit there and wish for 30 years you could be an actor. Like you just said, I'm gonna go do it, and you quickly discovered that's not for me.
Right.
Which isn't a failure; it's learning, right? And then you adapted, and then but I think so many people just kind of don't take any action and just think about what they want to do, never even learning if it's right. So I just love how your kind of journey progressed and got you to this beautiful place now.
Yeah.
Um, and so before I get into the kind of how you work with change in the ready set change and the framework, um, I'm curious because I talk to a lot of groups about change, and I do it. I don't want to say more superficially, but I do it a little bit more at the mindset, the motivation. I don't have the consulting arm, yet. We'll see if that comes. But I'm just curious. I, do you find that does most of your business come to you? Do people come to you because they're like, we need help with change, or are you having to kind of educate them and be like, look, you've got the ERP rolling out and you've got the emails you're going to send, but there's a whole extra level to make this effective. So do you find that like people are already open to it, or do you have to kind of go and convince them that they need this?
Usually when they're contacting me, they're already convinced that they know that they need some help. They have
Mm-hmm.
a big change happening. They're not quite sure where to begin. And so one of the biggest projects that I've worked on was for the state of Michigan. I implemented the change management plan and the effort for the Michigan Medicaid expansion in 2014. And that was, I only had a 6 month lead. I mean, they contacted me in September and said, boy, we really need some help with this change. And so that was people who knew me
Mm-hmm.
from some other work that I had done and brought me in. And I ended up working with the department for about 8 years in a consulting capacity for them. And it was a phenomenal success for the
Mm-hmm.
state. We had, it was part of the ACA, and which was if you remember, it was the Affordable Care Act,
Mm-hmm.
healthcare. And so it was just um, a simple change in the sense that we weren't doing, well, it was a simple change, but it was not easy. I'll say that.
Yeah, that's like many things.
Yes, like many things. And it was a very important change for the state of Michigan. What it meant was that the eligibility to join Medicaid was expanded. So the eligibility requirements were loosened so that people earning a little bit higher income but having still need could join the program, and they
Mm-hmm.
previously couldn't. Um, and so one of the things that I thought was so interesting about that particular change was the fact that we were extending this to like a family of four
Mm-hmm.
who was earning up to about $120,000. And people felt like, wow, that's pretty generous. Well, they had to meet other criteria, but one of the pieces of that expansion was the fact that a family of four who was, both parents had jobs, but they were earning less than that, could not get any kind of um, government health care, and nobody wanted to be on Medicaid
Mm-hmm.
particularly. And so we wrote the program as though it were a private program. We gave it a private name, Healthy Michigan Plan,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like an HMO, and you had a card and you had to pay for a health savings account and the whole works. And people really liked this idea. We had beautiful branding and had worked with an ad agency to do some great art. And we had this fabulous rollout where we thought we would have maybe 60,000 people join within that first year. And that was like a big goal. We weren't sure we'd make it. But by August of that year, we were up to 100,000. We ended up with like
Wow.
116,000 members in that plan. It was very helpful.
And this sort of starts leading into the model because the story is in your book. So anyone wants some more detail, I would go check that out. But it's funny when we talk about simple but not easy. I love how like one of the simple examples in the book is just the login page and how like the name was something I forget what the original name was, something kind of obscure, very technical sounding.
My
And what was
Cam.
that?
My Cam.
My cam, and you're like, let's say the I am login, right? Like letters I am letter I login, like oh that, but it's like these things that we think are overly simplistic. Like that's not going to make a difference, but sometimes with change, especially just changing it so people don't have the association of Medicaid. Is even, and I don't want this. This is not a political podcast, but even the naming, right,
Yeah,
of the national program, the people on one side, this is the Affordable Care Act. The other side is like it's Obamacare. And then
right.
later on, you find people saying, "Oh no, no, I don't have Obamacare. I have the Affordable Care Act." Like,
Right.
but the simplest things, and that kind of leads into your model, which is the first. So you have the word "ready" as an acronym,
Yes.
and the R stands for relevant and relatable messaging.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so I'd love to just go through it, and this I think is an example of that. Like you changed the messaging in a way that made it more relevant, more relatable, and people suddenly embraced it. So if you're going into an organization and they've got some change coming, whether it's AI or ERP or I've done a number of programs like, oh, we're rolling out new corporate values and we want people to actually do something with them, like things like that.
Yes.
How does the R, the relevant, relatable messaging, work in that context?
Well, you know what I find is, I mean, we talk about this about the fact that people love story. You and I talk about those kinds of things in our National Speakers
Mm-hmm.
Association, and yet I find that so many times an organization will just ignore the fact that people love stories and they will listen to stories and they remember stories. And so when I'm looking for some way to get across a message with my audience, with my, stakeholders, I have to figure something out that is relevant to them, that they can see the relevancy in their work or in their project or in their life, and also something that is relatable to them. So if I said, well, it's as if you were, flying to France every week and you had to, maybe make a detour one time. It would be really hectic. Well, that's not very relatable. Nobody flies to France every week. I mean, I don't anyway, and I doubt that, many of us are
Hmm.
there jet setters in that way. So I have to make sure that what I'm talking about is relatable also, that real people can relate to it. That's like an example is like talking about, grocery shopping or talking about, driving to work or driving to an appointment. Just the day-to-day relatable types of activities that we have, when I can pair those things with a bigger idea and create a storyline, that really helps that messaging get across. That helps people understand the change. And really understanding the change is that first step into the mindset shift of the change. And I have found different techniques. It's not always clear to me what this story is going to be. And sometimes it takes a little thrashing around. Sometimes I'll have multiple storylines also. I may have a relevant, relatable example or story for my executives, and I may have one that's for my stakeholders who are maybe frontline leaders or,
Hmm.
frontline um, employees working in a customer service sort of environment. So I could have different storylines, but what I want to avoid is this tendency that we have to copy the buzzwords that we get from like a software company, right? Like interoperability, it's,
Hmm.
fully, it's streamlined and interoperable, and you'll be able to, have this wonderful AI function. You're like, what are you talking about? So it's not relevant or relatable. And I think that's a mistake that we make up front. We have to take the time to figure it out. What's that story? What would make sense about this change? And we can describe it not in a condescending way, but in a very understandable, meaningful way.
So I have a couple questions on this. So for people listening who are going through change, but maybe they're not the high level executive who's in a position to, book April to come in and work with them, but maybe someone's reading a book and it's like, I want to start this process. How do you or how do they go about mining and finding some of these stories?
Oh, that's a great question. I like to do a couple of different things. I like to see if I can compare it to a story that already exists. Like, is this change, like, is this a big transformational change or is this a small incremental change? Right? When I'm thinking about the type of change it is, then I'm thinking about the type of story that may work. So I'll look at some archetypes of different stories, such as, the story of the journey, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we've embarked on a journey and here we are starting out and now we're, and as we know, a story has a beginning, which really kind of establishes the circumstances, the setting, and then the beginning of the story kind of morphs into the middle of the story. And the middle is where everything's, happens. There's some sort of conflict. Somebody wants this and somebody else wants this, or we think we're moving on a journey in a direction and suddenly we run into, a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And then the crisis is resolved, and then we move into that ending of the story, like what did we do to resolve the crisis and what did we learn going forward and how have we adjusted? So I try to compare it to I'll think about different story structures and think, well, that doesn't really fit. David and Goliath type of a structure doesn't fit here. Um, the journey, maybe the hero's journey fits here. And then I also will work with images. So I will put up, I have, probably 20 slide decks of some random images,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll put up random images and I'll ask the the some stakeholders, like a representative team, stakeholders and leaders, to think about what does this image make you think about when you are thinking about this change, right? Like we define what the change is. Here's what the change is. We define what the benefit of that change is. And then we think about, does this image evoke any thoughts about this particular change? And sometimes we'll get really interesting ideas. And then we just kind of have to shape those into a story that's relatable and a story that's very relevant to the stakeholders. Because when you hit on that story, and it doesn't have to be a big story. When you hit
Hmm.
on it though, it's it's one of those things that makes people instantly say, "Oh, oh, I get it. Oh, I get it. Now I get it." And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to describe the benefit of the change. So I do have an example of this. When I was working at Michigan, I was trying to just, well, my boss, who was just, she was brilliant. She was trying to describe this change to some stakeholders. And she tried several times, but she was very technical. That's why she was so brilliant.
Hmm.
And I love the fact that she understood like she was a technical genius and she needed people who were not technical around her to assist her thinking, you know. And I was one of those. And so she was always describing the relational database, the enterprise resource planning system, and how it would all connect to each other. She was always talking about the technology.
Hmm.
And she couldn't get across the idea of what this would mean for the people who were going to be implementing it. And we needed them to get on board because you can't go out alone. We had to have them on board. And at the time, my kids were really young. Uh, and I was running around with kids in the car going to do errands and, you know, dealing with the car seats and all of that. And as I was, you know, frustrated with having to go to 6 different stores on a Saturday, you know, to get groceries, the pharmacy, I had to go to the hardware, I had to go to the bank, go buy shoes, you know, all these stores, in and out of all these different stores. I was so aggravated. And then, you know, we have in Michigan, we have these Meyer Thrifty Acres. And so I then went to Meyer Thrifty Acres the next week and found it was so simple because everything that I was looking for was in one place: groceries, hardware section, pharmacy, a bank. They even sold shoes. So I was like, huh, this, this is the thing that we need to tell our people that
Hmm.
were trying to get involved. This is the story. So I went and told them this story about running all these places versus running to one place and going in one place, getting everything I need and coming out. And it saved me 4 or 5 hours that weekend. And when they heard that, they said, "Oh, we totally get it." They understood that the new ERP was going to be the one-stop shop for them.
Hmm.
And when they understood that, they were good. It made sense. And they constantly said it to each other. And even through 8 upgrades and then a brand new system, they kept saying, "Don't break it. Don't break the mire," because they loved the way it worked.
That's great. And all right, so that's, look for the stories, figure out what the benefit of the change is, find the story that relates to that. The second question before we move on to the next letter is, when you say kind of this messaging, so you find the stories, who are you rolling this out to? Is this like in conversation? Is it like on that poster in the elevator lobby, that, the mission statement that come like, how do you then get this message out there?
Yes, and to everyone that we can find. Yes, it has to be coming out of the leaders' mouths, has to be in our written communication. And as I mentioned, you know, sometimes we have a little bit of different storylines for different audience members. So just, you know, tracking on that, making sure that you're using, you know, the example or the story that you've created for that group with that group. But yes, it's everywhere. It's in communication. It's in everything that we're doing to help people remember the benefit of the change, right? Because in change, like it's difficult. We're in the midst of it. It's hard. It's uncomfortable, and I'm really unhappy. But if I can keep in my mind what that end goal is, the benefit of the change is that I had one place to go. I went one place. I got everything I needed and I came back out. Now, am I sad to give up my personally built, you know, custom database that I have, tweaked until it's just exactly how I wanted. Yes, but I am benefiting because I am going to have one place to go. Instead of having to go to every single department and ask for their students' grades, I'm going to now go one place, get everything I need about that student, and come back out. And so when I constantly focus on that benefit of the change with that story, I can help people move through. And it's going to be in written communication, in spoken communication, and we'll use it to frame a number of different types of, scenarios to explain what's our next step.
Okay. And I love that, just the clear communication to get people on board. And you had mentioned in that first step a couple times, you mentioned getting, communicating and connecting with stakeholders,
Yeah.
which kind of leads to the E, which is to engage leaders as sponsors. So I think this is a good little distinction because we think we got to get leadership on board, and you do, but you're not saying you have to get like every leader on board. It's like you kind of get your sponsors, the people who back it, and get their support on it, right?
Yes, we need one sponsor. Sometimes people want to have a lot of sponsors, but we just really need one person that is accountable for the change. One of the PMO directors I used to work with, he say the throat to choke, right? This is the person that has the budget, that has the power, and they are in charge of this change. And so we need that one person, but then that sponsor needs to cascade information through their leadership team. And
Mm.
having this throat to choke I think is really important and being connected with them so that they can engage all of the users and all the other leaders that they need to influence is really the most important piece. And one of the things that I found in working with sponsors was that they're very busy.
Hmm.
And they're also a little bit intimidating because sometimes they're high up in the organization. It's the CFO or maybe even the CEO. And I kind of early in my career felt like they knew what to do. I thought, well, they must know what to do. I mean, my gosh, she's boss of this whole company, right?
Hmm.
Like, of course they know what to do. But as I grew in my own skill set and in my experience leading projects, I started to see that many times the sponsor did not know what they were supposed to do. And it took a sponsor who was kind of stepping out on me a little bit. She was not fully engaged or interested in sponsoring the change the way that I knew it needed to be helped and be sponsored. And I kind of realized it had to be me to
Hmm.
help her understand what to do. And I created a tool for her and then I worked with her every week. I only had 10 or 15 minutes a week with her, but I would work with her every week with this tool and talk to her about what she needed to be communicating, let her know what was going out under her email, um, what activities I needed her to show up at, like a town hall or some sort of event. And then I wanted her to know kind of what what the word on the street was about this change because sometimes you'll see little pockets of resistance pop up and I wanted to make sure she was aware of those
Hmm.
things. And then I also ensured that she had a key message every week that she could just repeat in any conversation and that she also was able to talk about celebrating milestones, whether that was something like, we started user acceptance testing, or if it was something like, oh, Avish is, getting married. That's exciting, some sort of um, personal celebration that she could share with others. And when I started using this tool with her on a weekly basis, I could see the pieces that I had previously missed with other sponsors. And then I designed a process to go with the sponsor. And my process is that I do a kickoff just for that sponsor. We go through kind of past projects they've led, what went well, what didn't go well. I give them feedback about what I've heard in the environment about how things have been going and what people are worried about with this particular change. And then we really dive into their strengths and I figure out what they're good at. And then
Hmm.
I have them doing things they're good at all the time. If they're great at telling stories, I send them out, go talk to everyone.
Uh-huh.
if they're better at metrics, maybe they're not so good in front of a crowd. I might have them, run a dashboard, create a dashboard that they can speak to or write about every week. I'm trying to figure out like how do I help them connect and engage with stakeholders. And then the stakeholders, I've got them always kind of in front of the sponsor in their mind so that they are thinking about, that frontline employee, that supervisor, thinking about that manager or somebody, their salesperson who's out on the road. And then, we're targeting our messaging. I also ask my sponsors to help think about that relevant, relatable story. So
Mm.
that's what we do with the leaders. And then we
So I
cascade down.
so I would think the sponsor is a real critical component of making this change effort successful. How do you, because I could almost imagine a scenario where like a CEO brings you in, but they're like, oh, like Jane's gonna be working with you on this, but Jane's not particularly interested in working with you. Or, like, so how do you make sure you get the right sponsor?
Well, it's not, I don't always have the right sponsor. I mean, sometimes I have terrible sponsors or sponsors that don't know the change, don't care about the change, are not on board with the change, even though they might say to the CEO, oh, yeah, totally, I'm on board with the change, but they might turn around and like roll their eyes. I mean, that happens. And my goal is to do everything that I can humanly do to help that sponsor connect and do what they're supposed to do. But there have been times where I have asked if we could pair the sponsor with somebody else. And I might pair them with somebody who has more experience or has a little more political leverage in the
Mm-hmm.
organization. That's sometimes sponsors are seen as weak, and if you have a sponsor that is perceived as having weakness in the organization, I think it's important to pair them up with somebody strong. Um, and not to tell them that. I mean, I'm not going to say to them, I think you're rather weak, and I'm
That
going
might
to
not go so
partner you
well.
up. I could pair you up with someone else who's much stronger than you are. But, I mean, I am going to do the best that I can to try to build this foundation because it's really important to the stakeholders that they are hearing from their sponsor. They see the sponsor. They are active and visible in the change.
And so, just so I'm clear and listeners are clear, you've mentioned sponsors and stakeholders. So, what's the sort of differential there?
Yes, the sponsor is there's one sponsor, right? That is the person with the money, that's the budget, that's the
Mm-hmm.
authority, that's the throat to choke. Stakeholders, anybody who is impacted by a change is a stakeholder. And we have different degrees of stakeholders, as you can imagine, right? Like if you are impacted directly by a change, like you have to use a new computer system, a new software, or maybe you have a new boss to report to, you have an organizational restructuring, you are definitely a stakeholder, right? You might even be called a stakeholder, and we might call you a special name of end user, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is the person who is an end user, who's actually at the end of the process, is using the technology or the new system or the new structure. So that's a special type of stakeholder, an end user. But other stakeholders could be people who are not directly impacted, but are somewhat downstream impacted. They are still stakeholders. And so sometimes we'll use like a stakeholder matrix to look at, who is being impacted the most, who's being impacted the least, and then who is the most vocal and who's the least vocal, and kind of, matrix those groups to help figure out who do we need to really stay in touch with in terms of communication. But all stakeholders are important. And for example, when I did my the Healthy Michigan plan program, one of the ways that I was very concerned about how are we going to reach all of the stakeholders because all of the stakeholders included the citizens of the state, and there were
Mm-hmm.
8.5, 9 million stakeholders there. I thought, wow, this is pretty massive. But so what we looked at was associations that were connected to the state, right?
Mm.
And so we pushed our communication through the associations who would push it to their members, who would push it to their members, right? And that's cascading process went through the state so that everybody was aware of what was happening before it happened, which is huge.
Hmm.
That's the next one, which is advanced communication. So,
Oh
yeah,
yeah, well
we
let's move on. Yeah, that's the A is advanced communications.
Yeah, so it was important to really push the communication, out through all of the channels that we could think of to get to all of the different stakeholder groups because we didn't want any stakeholders to be left out and to not understand what was happening. And yet, it's very tough for a team, a small team, working at the state to be able to communicate with all of the citizens. So, but the great thing about the state is they do have, you know, communication governance. They do have
Hmm.
large communication tools, and so I worked with the governance team. I worked with our the communication director of the agency to ensure that we got the messaging out.
Got it. And so you already started talking about the A, which is the advanced communication. This is where you're getting the communication out, kind of disseminating it. Um, there are two things I wanted to ask you about that I read in the book that kind of jumped out at me. One is this idea you have in there of just send an email thinking, uh, which I think we all fall into. It's like I just send an email, but could you explain a little bit about what that is and why maybe it's not the best form of thinking?
Yeah, I don't know. I found that particularly offensive and frustrating would be like on a Friday at 3 o'clock or something. Somebody would like from IT would send out an email and say, "Oh, on Monday your computer will look completely different. We've re-imaging all the computers over the weekend." And we're like, "What are you talking about?" Like there was no detail at all. It's just like, "Oh, here's a heads up, 3 o'clock Friday that you're gonna have a
Hmm.
completely different computer on Monday." And it was like, well, wait a minute. There's things I need to save. Like I have to make sure my files are backed up. I have stuff like on my desktop. You're gonna, delete everything. So I think that this send an email is like it's a form of denying the fact that people need communication in advance.
Hmm.
It's sort of this um, lazy way of thinking about communicating. Oh, we'll just send an email and everybody will read our email. Well, I'll tell you, people don't read emails. They just don't. People don't read emails. They don't read emails that matter, that are important, that say right in the subject line, this is important for your work. They,
Hmm.
ignore it, go
Well, I
on.
think that people stopped reading emails, so people started overusing the word urgent in the
Yes.
subject line. So now we ignore the urgent because we're like, this is. I've been getting this. I've been getting these emails from the Census Bureau about a survey they want me to take, and they have been putting in like last reminder, and I'm going in there like, wait, this is not the census. I'm not legally required, but they are writing it in a way where it's like, reminder, you have to do this. Like, but it's like, oh, it would help us if you did this. Like, oh, like you are making me more likely to zone out of your future communication now.
Yes. And so it's really tricky, Avish, because sometimes, you're trying to send so much communication to make sure people know something. And at the point they get so sick of you sending them things, it's difficult. You're like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
now I'm so sick of you and I'm not even going to open this. If I see the word survey in any email, I delete it. Like
Mm-hmm.
I delete it instantly. It's like, no, I don't want to do your survey. And yet I'm begging people, please do my survey, right?
Yeah.
So it's just really frustrating. Email is so overused, that you cannot count on sending an email and having people read it and that they would know what's coming. So you have to make the assumption that they are not going to read the email. You're going to send it multiple times with different subject lines to try to entice them, obviously, and yet they still probably might ignore it. And so what other options do you have, right? Like we can text, we can put pop-up windows. I've
Mm-hmm.
seen a lot of IT departments resort to pop-up windows saying, your system has been changed. You have to click on this box, read this and click on the box to start working with your new system, with your new uh, image. I mean, there's just a lot of challenges when it comes to just send an email. It's not going to be very effective because
Well,
you have to use more than just an email.
what sounds, depending on the size of the organization too, what sounds incredibly inefficient, but when you talk about effectiveness versus inefficiency, is just like talking, right? Like walking around from cubicle to cubicle and just being like, oh, hey, heads up, if you missed the email, we're doing this update next week. And boom, just like, that sounds like, oh my God, but realistically, how long would that take? Like an hour, maybe?
Well, I
Now,
think
if you're
it
talking about a
depends
thousand
though.
person organization, it won't
Yeah,
work,
like I'm
but
working with some large organizations who have multiple locations all over the place.
sure, that's
And
not going to work.
yeah, that you can't necessarily, and many of the leaders are not in person there, like they're remote leaders, but
Yeah.
um
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
it's
sure. Obviously, it's a case by case, but I'm just thinking. I
yeah,
worked
it's
at
tricky.
Chase Manhattan. And it was like a building that had like 14 floors, and I'm like, you know what? It would be a pain, but if and so it's not every change, but if it's like a real major change and you want to get
Right?
people on board, like a little extra time will probably save you a lot of headaches down the road.
So I do have to like digress and tell you this story about this financial system that we were implementing. I discovered, like by accident in a meeting, I discovered that within like a month they were going to change the payroll system and nobody knew. And I was like, wait, you're gonna change the payroll system. They're like, oh
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it goes in next month. I'm like, but nobody knows this. And they're like, well, I know, but we're gonna send an email, right?
Yep.
I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I went back to my one building that I worked in, went back to the one building. I worked in the building with all the leaders of the agency. And so I actually grabbed an 11 by 14 sheet of paper out of the printer and I did a like, with a Sharpie, like attention, payroll system will change on August 30th. And, big exclamation points. And I posted it. We had the only way to get, they didn't, you could take the stairs, but it was primarily elevators. I posted one of these. I made 14 copies. I posted one on each floor above the elevator button. And I had put my email on there. Email me or call me if you have a question. And all of a sudden, leaders start calling me, like, what is this? What did I just see? And that was a very effective way to get it in front of the leaders quickly because
Mm-hmm.
I just posted it. So sometimes physical connection like that
Yep.
is very effective, Avish. It's just great, to walk around, tell people to post something in a central place that they're all going to see it. And yet, at the same time, I was just like beside myself, like, don't you understand? Like, this is the biggest impact change you
Yeah. You
could
don't mess with
do.
payroll.
You touch people's payroll, you're like touching like
Yeah.
a
And
nerve
and
completely.
in a now when I worked a corporate job was 20 plus years ago. Now with so much more distributed teams and virtual, like maybe the walking around or the signs don't work as much, but there are still a lot of groups that work. And it is funny how, and there's I think this you see this in marketing and communication and leadership. There's almost like the email is just easier. It's like protected. So if you work at a company of like 100 people, 150 people, it's in one location. Like it's not that
Yeah.
hard to just go to
It's
each
not
department.
that hard. You're right. You're right. That you completely, you know, talking to people, walking around and socializing that idea is perfect. If
Mm-hmm.
you're all there,
Yeah,
in an environment, it works great.
yeah. Now,
Yeah.
if you're a large, 2,000, 5,000 plus company, like you said, with multiple sites and people working remotely, it's a little different. But you gotta, manage the kind of tool for the task. So,
Yes.
um,
Yes. You're
well, we're
absolutely
coming
right.
close to the end, and we've only gotten through three, so I want to kind of quickly touch upon the last two, and we've been talking so much about each one. So let me get into the D, which is develop support and training. And so this is, I think when we're thinking about change management, this is what a lot of people jump to. It's like
Yes.
we got to train our people on the new ERP system or on the tech that we're going to roll out or whatever.
Yes, and they need to, understand how to log in. They need to
Mm-hmm.
understand how to use the system to do their job. And so there's a lot of work in that area. And that is the place I agree with you that where everybody thinks about change management, they think about kind of that training and development piece. And it's very important, and it's one of the I feel like it's one of the pieces that is incredibly important and has to be done well, and yet sometimes it gets a little bit of a short shrift in terms of leaders thinking about it and maybe recognizing the importance of it. And I've also learned over time, that no matter how many times the vendor says, "Oh, we have training, right?" The vendor
Mm-hmm.
will always tell you they have training. And it's true, they do have training, but it's not the type of training that you need. It's the type of training where the vendor is showing you what you could use in every field. Like, here's a field, here's the drop down. Look at what you can pick, right?
Yeah, it's
But the training we need is here's what to pick for your business process. Here's what to do for your work. This is how we want to use the system for us. And so that's why training many times is a little bit of a quicksand sometimes for a company because they think the vendor has the training, and right as they're working through that training to look at it, they recognize like, oh, no, this is not what we need to do. And
yeah.
then all hands on deck to try to develop that training.
Right, and that's why you either need someone to work hand in hand with the vendor,
Yes.
even a consultant or someone internal who understands how this tool needs to be used, or to find like a third party group that like people who specialize in that sort of thing. Because I agree, I think a lot of the training you'll see with vendors is it's almost like a version of their sales training. It's like, oh,
Yes.
here's all the cool things you can do with this. Like, I don't need any of that for my job.
I'm not going to do that, right?
Yeah, I can, but I
It's
won't.
like it's nice I could pick Alaska, but hey, I'm in Michigan, you know.
Yeah, and it is funny how like some people do training on things like that. You can tell you can tell the elements of the tool that they are enamored with because they will just like wax poetic about how amazing this tool is and oh you can arrange
Yes.
this way and I'm like I don't need that at all. It's well I was about to go on a tangent but about
I
something
agree.
else but well let's talk about the last one then which is the why and I love this it's a letter Y but it stands for the word why which makes total sense and I love this one because I feel like when it comes to sort of thin slicing focus it's like for me like I said I'm not like a change management consultant per se I focus very much on like the mindset and the emotion around change and I think this is where kind of this piece comes in right it's like getting people to understand why this change is happening why it's important why it's relevant is that correct
Yes. And so the why is it's kind of multi-purpose why. I find that the word why comes up a lot when I'm getting close to implementation or I'm actually in implementation, execution of the change, and people start saying, why do we have to do this? Why do I have to do this? Why do I need to, what happens if I don't do it, right? Like
mm-hmm
then that resistance really kind of comes up. And so resistance is very human, very important. We are going to have resistance to a change. Hands down, always will have resistance. Even changes that we choose that are positive, we get resistance. So resistance is common. We should know to look for it. We should think about it up like very early on.
mm-hmm
I usually am thinking about it when I'm doing my stakeholder assessments. Um, I'm thinking about where's that resistance going to come from? What are people fearful about? And then I'm finding the that I'm trying to respond to their resistance with the why of the change. So they're
mm-hmm
asking me, why do we have to do it? And I'm responding to them with the why, which is the benefit of the change, right? There is a benefit to this change. We thought about that benefit in the relevant, relatable
I
story.
was going to say this
And
kind of comes full circle
and it
then
comes full circle that the why then is revisited. We're going back to it. We're reminding people of why. And we're also incorporating lessons we've learned along the way into that why, because we will have learned things, from that point on. And then we want to, and so I have a couple of ways that I like to break down resistance. And one of them is the book about the resistance avatars
yeah
and where
which is
they're
great and I took notes on that but that we could
yeah.
talk like 20 minutes on that so people should get the book but
But
it's about
yeah,
how they're positive
I think
aspects, but when used in the wrong way, they become negative. So,
yes. And so I think it's just really important to know that the resistance is going to come. Um, Recognize there's resistance to the mindset shift, which is incredibly important. Everybody has to go through a mindset shift
hmm
to really adopt that change. And it goes along also with the difficulty of behavior change. We have to change our behavior. So those two pieces have to happen. And without the mindset shift and without the behavior change, we can't get to that change adoption. And so it's it's really important to make sure that we have this line from resistance. Yes, we recognize it. We know it's here. I'm going to be trying to address it through my advanced communication all the way through. But then, sure enough, it's going to show up really close to the end. And I'm going to help people move through that resistance into that mindset shift, behavior change, and be able to adopt that change to go forward.
and it's funny because we talk about ignoring communication and things like that and the messaging, and I think that reason it comes at the end is because I think so many people just ignore the messaging until they absolutely have to deal with it. Part of it is we zone it out. Part of it is we're procrastinating, like, oh, I'll deal with this. And then all of a sudden, and you probably dealt this where it's like, it's a week out and all of a sudden people start raising objections. And you're like, where were you 3 months ago when we started this process? Why did you not bring any of this up? They're like, well, I'm bringing it up now. Like, well, yeah. But you have to be prepared for that and be prepared to address
Yes, yes, be prepared for that.
well,
I used to take up resistance somewhat personally, but now, I really use a different sort of mindset about it. I mean, I've done my own mindset shift. I see resistance as a welcome recognition that something's happening. I'm like, yes, they're finally aware. Like that, boom, it's finally hit them. So,
I just did an article on this. I think I posted on LinkedIn, which is about kind of apathy versus resistance and how we look at resistance as something bad, but at least when people are resisting, they're engaged in the process.
yes,
When they just stay quiet and don't raise anything, it's like we think it's good, like, oh, there's no objections, but they might just be like so done, they're like, whatever, I don't care, or internally being like, I'm not even going to do this thing they want me to do. But resistance, like you said, it's actually it's they're talking to you, they care a little bit, so that's a good sign.
yes, yes, I completely agree.
Well, this was great. I'm going to finish up here in just a minute by asking one final question, but just kind of summarize. So, if you want to learn more about you and the Ready Set Change model, your book, maybe look to engage you. They're going through a change, ERP reorg, something like that. They're like, oh, we could really use some help in this. How can people find you, connect you, get your book, learn more about you?
Yes, you can visit www.springboard-consult.com. So it's not the AIM dash, it's the
Just
springboard
the regular dash.
dash consult.com.
I
Yeah,
like that.
you
I
look
like that. That
there.
way you're not trying to tell people to go to aprilcallis.birchmeier.com and
Oh
hope they can
gosh,
type
no,
it
you'd
in.
never be able to spell it, I don't think. But yeah, there I've got my website for speaking, for consulting, and also for training for our the Certified Change Management Professional exam that's given by the
Mm.
Association of Management Professionals. So I train folks to take and pass that exam. We've had great success. We've got over 140 graduates who
Oh
have
wow.
passed the
So yeah,
exam.
if you're interested in getting that certification, check out April's website. And obviously, if you want the book, if you want to learn more about her speaking, consulting, training, go check it out. Hopefully, from this podcast, you see it's a big process, and she can help you with that.
Yes.
So April, final question. This is how I kind of like to end all my podcast episodes. Is I talk about this idea of saying yes and instead of yes but, which I know you're familiar with. And I do that because I honestly believe the world would be a better place if everyone just started with a default mindset of yes and instead of yes but. If they just started with that open mindedness, the world would be a better place. So, what is one small thing that you believe if everyone did, it would just make the world a better place?
One small thing that I believe if everybody did it would make the world a better place. I think if everybody heard the word change and thought, aha, I wonder what's that is, instead of thinking, oh gosh, no.
That is fantastic. Seeing change as an opportunity and not like, oh my God, I got to resist it. Yes, I agree. I'm biased, but I agree. The world would be a better place.
Go change and
Change it. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, April. This has been fantastic. So, and thank you everyone for listening. And be sure to check out April and be sure to tune in next week when we have another great podcast guest. Thanks, April.
Thank you.